Good evening. The September 19th special meeting of the Evanston City Council will come to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Here.
Councilmember Burns. Councilmember Sufferton. Here. Councilmember Ravel. Here. Councilmember Reed. Councilmember Hadakaris. Councilmember Kelly. Here. Councilmember Harris. Here. Councilmember Wynn.
We have a quorum present and are prepared to do our work. The first item on our agenda, as
My
always.
apologies, Mayor. I just want a point of order. I am also present.
Would the clerk please add Councilmember Reed to the roll? We'll begin with public comment, as always. So there's only a few folks who've signed up for public comment this evening. Each person will therefore be given the full 3 minutes. We'll begin with those who are here in person, beginning with Mary Rosinski.
Hi, and thank you. My name is Mary Rosinski, and I'm here on behalf of the Parks and Rec Board, and as well as hundreds of residents who have called, emailed, and participated with the city in discussions and surveys to open a dog beach park. $110,000 from the Good Neighbor Fund, $80,000, and CIP funds, $25,000, was set aside for this purpose. The board is looking for legislative guidance on how to move forward from you, the City Council. The dog beach was well used and generated an average of $53,000 in years 2011 through 2017. In 2018, there was no passes sold because of the rising water levels. The community called for the dog beach to be replaced, and in 2021, after compiling resident input and community meetings and surveys, the Parks Board recommended to the council to open a dog park at Clark Square. That meeting, City Council meeting, the issue was referred to opening a dog beach up at Lincoln Beach. Nothing has happened since then. It is a concern. It is also a concern that in the CIP draft for this year, there is no money allocated for the dog beach park. For many people, their dogs are their best friends, and being able to have a dog park beach improves the quality of life and makes Evanston a more welcoming community. So again, we, the Parks Board, are asking for legislative guidance on how to make this a dog park beach a reality. So that's all I want to say. I also wanted to mention that there is, and Stephanie's going to hopefully find the link, there is a really important survey online right now. We're going to keep it open for another couple weeks, I hope, on how you use the lakefront and the lakefront restoration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ray Friedman.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Sorry I missed the last council meeting. My mom was in the hospital last weekend, and now is in the nursing home, doing okay, thanks. It's been a few weeks, but I wanted to give my condolences to Carlos Sutton on the passing of his brother, Arthur Sutton. My thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. So I wanted to shift my focus to one of my favorite topics, finances. My first question is, why did we need to increase our budget from 2021 $293 million to $360 million for 2022? We're still spending the $44 million in ARPA funds, and you approved $10 million in general obligation bonds beginning of this year. How much will the budget be for 2023? When will we have the discussions and input from residents on the new 2023 budget, as we've always had in the past? When will the residents be part of this budget process? I'm glad to read that Luke Stowe will be practicing transparency, accountability, and will be using data to make decisions moving forward. Thank you, Luke. We are looking forward to reviewing the data that you've received to make your decisions. I was very impressed with Audrey Thompson on her use of data as it pertained to money needed for kids programs. I'm sure that Evanston employees deserve the bonuses that you're suggesting here tonight. I just don't know how it fits into our 2022 budget, as we haven't had a discussion on 23 budget yet. And thank you, Council Member Claire Kelly, for your suggestion to compensate the firemen and women and use ARPA funds to accomplish this. It looks like we're much better at budgeting our ARPA funds than we are in trying to balance our year-to-year budgets. I thought that by the end of September, at least we would have agreed on a 23 budget, or at least had several discussions on our goals and expectations for 2023. When is this new budget going to be discussed and have the residents involved in our 2023 budget? And I think that should be before we spend more money that, apparently we have too much of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the in-person portion of public comment this evening. So we move to the online public comment, which will be John Kennedy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. As a business person, I'm used to looking at projections. And the proposed CIP budget has a lot of them. If you look at page 3 of 36 or 6 of 45, depending upon which way you want to look at it, the staff has laid out a multi-year structure saying these projects last from a minimum of 3 years to 5 years. Makes perfect sense, making planning and constructing roads is an arduous process. But what is not being provided is some perspective on prior projects. I'm sure councils prior to this one has past CIP projects. Where are we on that? What kind of checks are we writing today for prior projects? And what the staff is asking us to do is add on to this, which, without this perspective, I think the council members are kind of looking at this, not in a clear perspective. This is important because the document goes on to compare the projects, each major section of the projects, to the prior average of only 2020 and only 2021 and 2022, of which the latter is not completed, as we all know. Without that perspective, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be brought up because each of these sections can have an extreme expense that can alter the averages of just a couple years. For example, the water main project. It's almost $9 million, and that's an aberration when you look at it in the long run. But as many of you know, my main focus is the Civic Center, and I kind of drilled down to look at just those details. And obviously, this is not an extensive review, but on page 11 of 36, or 14 of 45, depending upon which way you want to look at it, they have under the Civic Center major renovations of $50 million required. Major renovations, that's what they say. So if you go down, however, into the detail, into the spreadsheets toward the end, on page 30 of 36 or 36 of 45, you see where this $50 million comes from. And in the years 2025 and 2026, staff has said that they're going to be
15
spending
seconds.
$25 million each year on consulting services. Consulting services? I don't think the Sears Tower was built with $50 million of consulting services. I think the council needs to send this back to staff to sharpen their pencils. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes public comment for this evening. Brings us to special orders of business, beginning with SP1, which is the discussion item about which I believe there's a presentation expected from staff.
Members of the City Council, city manager, mayor, city clerk. My name is Laura Biggs. I'm the city engineer for Evanston. John Kennedy correctly reported an error, so thank you very much. I will correct that. The $25 million for 2 years for the Civic Center, that totals $50 million, is not consulting services. That is intended to be construction. So we'll make that correction. But tonight, I'm here to talk to you about generally the capital improvement program and some issues we are concerned about as staff. This program is typically posted with the budget the first Friday of October, which I think is the same budget schedule that we've always had. However, because we're having some issues that I want to talk to you about tonight, staff is struggling to pull together the capital improvement program that is of a reasonable level and typical of all the previous years of spending. So I'll just start with an overview really quick. Our capital program is made up of many different sections. The street resurfacing, water main, and sewer tends to be all the public right-of-way that's in the street, coupled with other transportation, which is things like street lights and traffic signals and bridges and things that aren't really straightforward street resurfacing or utility projects. The parks is a section, facilities, library. I just have not yet received their capital improvement budget, but typically the city council does not approve their capital improvement budget, but if they are levying a property general obligation debt to help fund it, then that debt limit is set by the city council. Our water treatment and storage, which encompasses our water plant into the 2 standpipes, and miscellaneous, which is usually some very small projects that just don't fit into the other categories. This year we have pulled out sustainability specific projects into their own section of the capital improvement fund. So where do our projects originate? Most of the projects honestly come from the operations and maintenance staff, bringing up the problems that they're having maintaining the infrastructure. We also take into account suggestions and requests that we get from aldermen, city manager, and honestly through the 311 system. A lot of that stuff actually tends to go to the operation maintenance staff and sometimes the engineering staff. But we also have adopted plans like the Streetlight Master Plan. We have legal requirements like the ADA Transition Plan that we're finalizing right now. And so those things also inform what projects we put in the capital improvement program. As Mr. Kennedy pointed out, projects have a life cycle that is long, usually. I will say 2 years is about the fastest anything ever gets through the capital improvement program. But most cases, planning takes a little bit longer, and sometimes the planning is occurring even before we budget for it. It's just the staff doing internal planning. Design so this planning part takes 2 to 5 years. What is interesting about that is that is the time period in which most public engagement occurs on our capital improvement program. And then design takes 6 to 18 months once we have the concepts finalized about what we're going to do. The engineers and architects go to work. We are typically not talking to the public during this time period. Construction, then, which is often the shortest part of this, is 3 to 24 months. Sometimes it lengthens out to 24 months because if it's an exterior outdoor project and it takes more than one construction season, they often get to take 6 to 8 months off in the middle of it. And then project closeout is usually 1 to 12 months. This is where we're just getting all of the paperwork finalized, the project's closing out punch list, or the contractor's closing out the punch list items that didn't get taken care of properly during the main construction. I will say the exception to this is when we get federal funding for transportation projects, which goes through Illinois Department of Transportation, and they typically take 5 to 10 years to issue the final payment for the final invoice to us to pay off the project. So we are still carrying like $4 million for Sheridan Road. I do not know when they will ask for that money, but they will give us at least 60 days to pay them when they ask for that $4 million. We always have too many projects for the capital improvement program. So the projects tend to fall into some really specific buckets. The first being immediate life safety. We thankfully don't have as many of those as we used to. We had quite a number 6 or 7 years ago, but we have been working our way through them. Long-term safety tends to be more like the things like sidewalk improvement and street resurfacing, park improvements sometimes fall into this category where you're definitely wanting to make the changes in order to make the world a better place and safer for all of the humans that are using it, but it's not like we're worried something's going to fail shortly. Maintaining operations is where most of our projects fall into, and this is honestly where a lot of the parks projects come and a lot of the facilities projects. It's not that we're worried that something is going to hurt somebody so much as we are concerned about the city to be able to continue the operations as they are performed now. And then other improvements. In some cases, like alley improvements, these are things that just are tremendous quality of life improvement for the residents and help out the city as well. In other cases, they're tied to things like equity or to CARP, where we're trying to change how we operate. Oh, finally, the council's always told us to really work at the worst situations first. We do incorporate equity and CARP goals when we're putting together the program and looking at the projects, but we tend to fix the things that are failing regardless of the geographic location. So here are our funding sources, which we have many different funding sources. And general obligation debt is actually the easiest to explain because the only limit on debt is how much the city is wanting to issue. But otherwise, we can use it basically however we want, as long as we try to spend it pretty promptly. But a lot of the other things have limitations on how they can be spent. So a lot of times these limitations are the revenue funds, like the water fund, the sewer fund, library. Money from those funds can only be spent on the assets that generate the revenue. So when we use parking fund money for a parking garage, we can only spend it on things like parking garages and parking lots. We can't spend it to make the Chandler Community Center a better place. It's really got to go to what it was generated for. And then we have some things like TIF that are geographically limited. CDBG falls into the same category. In the water and sewer world, we get a lot of money in low-interest loans. The interest rate is typically about half of what we pay for our municipal bond rate, and it makes these projects a lot more affordable. When they occur at the water plant, and it's an asset that has a life longer than 20 years, actually, it usually works out that the residents of Evanston pay a relatively small part because we sell water to wholesale customers who pick up the lion's share of the cost. But they've been very good to us over the years and have allowed us to accomplish a lot with our distribution and sewer system as well as our water plant improvements. Motor fuel tax can only be spent on street and transportation type projects. It can also be spent on personnel that maintain that, although that's not in the capital improvement program. And it is, you have to follow certain standards by IDOT, so I can't just do any street project with MFT funds. It has to meet some IDOT requirements. And then we have just other funds. We have money from waste transfer station settlement fees that we use to improve things. We get donations from private organizations like the Evanston Environment Association, the Levy Fund, or Levy Center has a Levy Foundation. And that helps us with some specific projects. Now this year, this is where it starts to get a little hairy. The budget this year is turning out to be much higher for capital than it has been in previous years when we tried to put together the program. I'll start with the water fund. This is not, there we go. This is a huge increase, but is largely due to a $52 million intake replacement, which is a very substantial project that goes 2 years, but is primarily in construction in 2023. That is funded through a combination of IEPA loans and WIFIA funding, which is a federal loan program. But parks and facilities have really gotten to be a lot more this year. We do not have a lot of options for funding parks and facilities other than general obligation bonds. And the number of needs that are starting to really pop up as things are failing are becoming more difficult for staff to manage to prioritize. And so that is skewing our budget. And I just want to say, in no way is staff saying that we want to spend this money. We'd actually struggle with staffing if we tried to spend this much money. But we do need to figure out like a long-term prioritization for these projects. And this slide indicates what I said before. When we look at streets and water main, we're spending almost $26 million, or we're proposing to spend almost $26 million. But very little of that is actually in general obligation bonds. It is largely funded by a lot of other funding sources, and that works pretty well until you get to parks and facilities. We are actually doing a somewhat decent job of trying to leverage some TIF funds to cover things, CDBG, and special, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing, and plan unit developments. And for the facilities, we received a Cook County grant for $2 million to replace the animal shelter, which in total, not just construction, but the whole thing is about $6.5 million. So it covers some of our costs, but not nearly all of the cost of that project. And then you can see that the remainder is smaller geo bonds, but it's not a big hit until you get to the water plant, which is actually using non-geo bond funds. And then this year, we put in a sustainability fund to start tracking those projects that are specific only to sustainability. But I feel obligated to point out that if you looked at any given capital improvement project, that most of them further CARP goals in some way. And then the sustainability fund is paying $130,000 towards capital improvement projects this year. The remainder of the sustainability projects, which is I think another $500,000, is proposed to be paid for by general obligation bonds. And this slide just indicates typical ways that we try to incorporate CARP into our projects. So for many years, 3 or 4 years now, we've been working on the Stormwater Master Plan. It's a long project because we have to flow test the sewers, build a model of our entire sewer system, and then see where the issues are. But that goes a lot to CARP with dealing with situations like the extreme flooding that we're getting during rain events, wanting to incorporate more green infrastructure, wanting to protect vulnerable populations from environmental justice issues. Similarly, when we look at things like the animal shelter, we're taking a building that is in no way compliant with modern building codes, and we're replacing it with a building that's net zero greenhouse gas emissions, generally incorporates a lot of other sustainability features as well. So I wanted to delve really quickly in each of these sections into some of our key projects just to let everybody know what's happening. We do actually have an increase in general obligation bonds this year in this category. Due to our Oakton corridor traffic calming improvements that we are proposing to put in. Most of our large streetscape projects we get federal funding for, but for a variety of reasons, Oakton is not really a very good fit for federal funding. We were fortunate to apply for a Cook County grant, Invest in Cook grant, and we were able to receive that, which is $500,000, and thank you, Cook County. But a lot of that is just going to have to be funded by general obligation bonds. It's not in a TIF area or CDBG. The Main Street Streetscape is another big project we are doing. We did water main a couple years ago to prepare for this in the business district. We have received a number of grants for this project, including a much earlier Invest in Cook grant that we are just getting to construction on, and the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. So that project will be a major improvement in that area in the Main Street Business District when it is complete. And lead service line replacement is really ramping up. We continue with our pilot program, but we are also required as of January 1st on our water main projects that if we touch a lead service to connect it to the water main, the new water main, we get to replace the whole lead service. And so that, between those two things, that's a pretty intensive cost that we are starting to bear. We are hoping to get grants to cover some of this at the front end, but that's a whole other discussion, but lead service line replacement is going to be a major liability as we move forward. And then some of our other transportation projects, we have the Ridge Avenue intersection improvements. Some of you may recall years ago when we were having a lot of traffic accidents on Ridge Avenue, we did a lot of police enforcement. We applied for a highway safety improvement grant from the federal government, and it was entirely based on a calculation of how many accidents you have for the amount of traffic. Bridge Avenue scored very well on that. And so we received that grant, and that funding is actually being obligated this year because it's being constructed by IDOT. It's actually out to bid right now, I think, but the construction is next year. Alley improvements, we're doing 2 CDBG alleys. We're doing a waste transfer station funded alley, and we hope to replace the alley using TIF funds that is a parallel to the Main Street Business District located to the south of them. Alley's in very bad condition, and we aren't going to be making it better by running a construction project. And then we are ramping up our sidewalk gap infill. The biggest cost of that is actually in the second ward, which I need to talk to Councilmember Harris about, but is putting sidewalk and street lights on a big section of Greenleaf and Hartree in the second ward. Parks, this is where we're seeing a big increase in general obligation bonds. I was directed last year, we got a quote for replacing Fountain Square. We have a failure in the fountain that is, in our opinion, due to the contractor's inability to construct a fountain properly. We have filed a lawsuit against them, and I was instructed to put money in this year's budget to replace it. The lawsuit, should we be successful, which we believe we have a very good shot at, will refund our money for doing the repairs. Athletic field lighting, we budgeted $600,000 last year, and we bid it. It was much more expensive, and we didn't have the ability to increase the budget. And unfortunately, costs have increased, so if we move forward with that, we would have to have some additional funding. Twiggs Park has the skate park going in, and that is going into construction in the spring. And then we have Independence and Larimer parks. I will stop here and say, I included in the packet a memo that we had with the Parks and Rec Board from August 18th, where we talked about the necessity to fund more in parks. And we went through and we said, look, we own all these assets in parks, and each of them has a life. I'm only showing playgrounds here, but there's a life for everything that's published by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. But it shows you that, my little thing here, that playgrounds have a useful life of 15 years. And we have 12 playgrounds that are over 25 years old. We don't have good records of when the last time they were replaced is. Our senior project manager in charge of parks has been here long enough that she knows what over 25, she doesn't know before that. So you can see, as you look at this list, these are the parks that are raising our general obligation bond issue, and I don't know how to tell you which parks to do. But many of these parks are experiencing equipment failures, and many of them are on the capital program in the next 3 years because they're experiencing equipment failures. And park failures, these pictures are kind of small. The equipment failure can be obvious to somebody, like a board a piece of it is broken off on the landing. But it also, this other picture shows a fairly common problem we have with wood structures, which is the beam corrodes at ground level. And then we can't really repair that short of just taking out the piece of equipment. This is, in fact, what happened at McCulloch Park a couple years ago that made it kind of an emergency to replace. And so this is what's happening at a lot of our wood structure parks. Metal structure parks come with their own issues, but it just so happened that a number of these playgrounds are wood structure parks. And we don't really, the maintenance staff does what they can, but they really don't have the ability to deal with this other than to just take out the equipment and wait for us to budget more money to replace the equipment. But you don't usually go in and just do a playground replacement because there's a lot of other aspects to a park. First of all, most parks have multiple amenities. If they have a playground, they often have a court, they have picnic tables, they have a pathway. And we are trying to bring the parks up to modern standards and make sure that ADA issues are met, for example, by improving the pathway system, making sure that the playground is fully accessible through the ADA access. And so by the time you get done, all the costs sort of add up. That memo indicated something like, just to fix individual amenities that were identified in the memo, courts, athletic field lighting, playgrounds, we should be spending $4.6-ish million a year, but in reality, that isn't doing all of the other miscellaneous things, really the answer is more like $7 million a year that need to be spent on parks if we want to maintain the operations that we currently have in parks. And that is a big if, and something that I think the city council would just need to consider, because it's kind of one or the other. We're just going to start not maintaining the operations by having to take out playground equipment. And Fitzsimmons, poor little Fitzsimmons Park, which is by Nichols School, is probably one of the worst situations where this is happening, where we just go in like every 6 months and remove another piece of equipment, because it just got started on the capital program later than the others. But these are like the choices that staff is having to make, and we feel that the council should be a little bit more involved in, if we cannot spend the $7 million we need to per year, then we need to have better criteria from above in how we choose to prioritize fixing parks. We have a somewhat similar but slightly different problem in our facilities. The city owns and maintains about 60 facilities, 60 buildings. Many of them are things like field park houses, which also have their issues. But we have sort of a number of problem facilities, I'll say 6 problem facilities, that are experiencing or getting very close to having failures of multiple building systems, where the HVAC, the electrical, potentially other things are all at the end of their life, and the staff does not realistically expect them to be operating in 5 years without a major investment. And so next year, we have the animal shelter renovations. Again, that's one where we received a grant from Cook County. The animal shelter building, in addition to just being entirely too small for its current use, the HVAC is held together with Scotch tape. It is the last time, last year, we had the compressor go out. I think they went on eBay and found a compressor part that would replace it, because legally we cannot replace the HVAC system. We would have to bring the building up to code, and there is no way to bring the existing building up to code. It doesn't meet ADA, many other issues. Civic Center, we can talk in detail some other time, but essentially we're getting to the point where we need to decide if we're going to stay here and then we need to renovate, or if we're going to build a new facility. And we do have an ongoing study that we'll be talking about in the next month or two. But in either case, from the moment we decide that path, it's going to take 3 to 5 years for us to be in the new building or a fixed up building. But it's a big project, so it's going to take time to pull together. And so I am recommending that we budget consulting services starting in 2023. So whatever path we choose, we have the ability to start going down that, because the HVAC in this building is really struggling. We also had suggested that if we are staying in this building, that we address situations with the window and tuck pointing, because we are dealing with an ongoing exterior wall failure in an isolated section. But as we look at the windows and we look at the brick, there's a lot of places where water can get in because of gaps at the windows, gaps or deteriorated grout. And we believe that before more walls are seriously damaged, that we need to address the exterior envelope and button it up. And the Ecology Center just sort of came on our radar, unfortunately, this year. We had a small project to upgrade restrooms and to deal with the fact that the water service of the building keeps freezing during cold weather. But while we were contemplating that and starting to think about the design, we are having an issue we discovered with the subfloor system. So this is the mechanical room, and there's actually some more over here. And the floor in the mechanical room has rotted out. They've actually replaced this piece around the mop sink that's on the floor as a temporary thing. Over here where the furnaces are, you can definitely feel as you step on the floor sinks. And that's largely under the furnaces, so it was difficult for facility staff to do anything, but they've sort of stabilized it for like a year until we can get an assessment of how to replace the structural floor system. So we have our original project, but we also propose hiring a consultant who will look at the ways that moisture is getting into the crawl space underneath, and we'll figure out ways that we can address that. And then they will help us repair the flooring system. As we looked at the building's actually built in 3 different expansions, the original building and then another expansion that put on the great room area, and then a 3rd expansion which expanded the classroom slightly just a few years ago. That original building, the flooring in all of it is failing now that we look at it. So, but the building's not very big, so the cost is perhaps able to be absorbed unexpectedly. But when we do look at our 6 buildings, the other 3 being the service center, which we've talked about previously, but we're waiting for the study to finish before we budget a lot more money, noise in the police fire headquarters. These 6 buildings are absorbing 80, which are 10% of our building population, are absorbing 88% of the projected general obligation bond for facilities next year. So that leaves relatively little to deal with a lot of the other things like roof replacements and such. So this is where, again, we are going to need to, I think, as a city, start coming up with plans for what we want to do with our building stock long-term. Miscellaneous, one of the things that's bubbling up from the ADA transition plan study is just that part of the transition plan is no city is 100% compliant with ADA, so you build a plan to get you from point A to point B, and then you budget money every year. This is not nearly enough, but we do actually pick up ADA improvements in other projects. And then public art, the city budgets $30,000 a year in public art purchases. It's been a long-term investment. Our sustainability, which looks at city solar infrastructure, completing the environmental justice initiative study to determine give the guidance on how to address environmental justice areas, and developing a CARP dashboard. And then water treatment, there's always lots of things going on at the water plant, but the one that is overarching this year is the intake replacement. So that is actually my presentation. I think next steps would be, we can certainly discuss tonight if people want to, but probably we'll need to come back and have another conversation after the budget is posted. But we recognize that this is previous years we've had 1 hour to hour and a half discussion about CIP out of the entire budget, and we recognize that this year that it is probably time to have a more serious, detailed conversation.
Thank you, and strongly agreed on that last point. I think it's important that we're doing this today, and it's going to have to be one of a number of conversations. So speaking of conversation, we begin with Council Member Reed.
Thank you. Very sobering information for us. I've just a few questions. So on page 6, you mentioned that there were mandates, for example, for the parking fund, or that those funds can only be spent on the parking assets. Where does that mandate come from?
I believe that is a legal requirement when you set up a revenue fund as the city, but I would have to defer that to Hitesh or the legal department.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Just being the enterprise fund, like parking fund, water fund, sewer fund, it is required that, yes, we maintain on that kind of an enterprise fund or just like a business activity. The money comes in from the parking fund should be used for those things. Now, again, is required means not legally required, but required means from a good, as a practice. I mean, we transfer the funds as an administrative transfer from parking fund and water fund to the general fund to kind of reimburse for all kinds of services and some of the other staff. So yes, we do that. But generally as a good practice, because obviously even the transfers which we do that, and that comes up in my rating agency call, and they ask that, okay, can you tell us what you're doing this with? Because this is the enterprise fund, parking fund, or water fund.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that because my understanding is that we have made transfers in the past from the parking fund to the general fund, And I just want to highlight, particularly, we added paid parking along the lakefront, and we also made the lakefront free for Evanston residents. So it may make sense to transfer the new revenue that we received from parking along the lakefront to support our lakefront operations, because we essentially shifted the revenue from charging for beach access to parking revenue. And I think in the last, I know the first few months where we piloted this, we made over $80,000. I think the number is at $270 some odd thousand for last year. So I just want to note that that's an opportunity to recoup some revenue. And then next, you mentioned a new sustainability fund for our CIP budget. Where are those funds coming from?
I believe that they are coming from, there was a small increase in wheel tax that gets deposited into the sustainability fund, and there is a convoluted equation when we got off of the ComEd franchise agreement. We were getting free electricity for city buildings, and now they charge us for that, but then they give us the estimated cost that we used to pay, and that difference and we're actually paying a lot less, it turns out, once we're now paying for electricity directly, and so that difference goes into the sustainability fund.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, really proud that this council was brave enough to support that wheel tax increase that will add, $200,000 to $250,000 a year to our infrastructure spending, and particularly on sustainable infrastructure. And so I think this was a really important thing that this council did. It's only $5, but it helps us meet our goals. Those are my questions for now. I'll yield.
Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Kelly, I think that was?
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And is that slides, were those emailed to us, that PowerPoint?
No, but we'll post it with
Okay.
the city council package.
Great, thank you. So a little bit to Mr. Kennedy's point, I mean, it kind of looks like we're just a city just starting today. I mean, as you said, projects take from 2 to 8 years. Can we get a chart of, a spreadsheet of projects that started 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that were approved, where we're at with them currently, all the, because there's a lot of ongoing projects that were approved of in the past, where we're at in terms of the payment on them, what remains in the balance, when they're expected to be finished, so we can look at this in light of already approved projects. Would that be possible to bring that back?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
How many years back would you like to go?
So whatever was approved and it's still ongoing. So you said it's like 2 to 8 years, so I don't know, I'm guessing 7 or 8 years. Yeah, that are either pending, haven't started, or have started, and where they're at. I mean, I see that when I kind of look at a few other municipalities, they have that, so you can see what's remaining, how much expenditure is remaining. I think that kind of helps to gauge new projects, and if that.
Yeah, that's fine. I believe that the oldest projects that are still ongoing are from 2016 or 2017.
Yeah, and the balances and what's owed, that would be great. And then also, I mean, just because, it'd be, in order to prioritize, would it be possible to get sort of a list of what you all view as like really essential, non-negotiable, projects that have to happen, so that just to help us as stewards of the tax dollar to try to be able to gauge, what is most important? Like,
I think that is a little bit part of the problem that I'm struggling with. If the criteria is to maintain operations as is, we're not going to be able to do everything at once. And like in parks, the consequence is largely we're just taking out equipment until we get around to replacing it. So that's where, staff is struggling with, why do we pick one park over another park?
right, so maybe it's not necessary. So when I say like what we have to do for safety reasons or for other, like this absolutely has to be done. Maybe the parks don't need to, maybe that's, so I just wonder if there's sort of an essential or non-negotiable, like this we have to do. Absolutely, just so we can look at those and then be able to look at everything else after that. I mean, maybe nothing's necessary, I don't know. But I assume there are some projects that we have to go forward with. And if I'm wrong, then so be it. Then that's a good time to tighten belts.
Okay, I will think on that.
Thank
Discuss
you.
with staff.
That would be great. And then lastly, of these, when I went through the spreadsheet of all those items, if it's possible to identify also the projects that are routine, meaning that would require, that traditionally and going forward do require either annual or every 2-year expenditures, to be able to assess what should just be incorporated into our regular budget. What should be incorporated annually into our budget, because I see some items on there that do seem like, okay, these are things that we have to spend every year on. I think that would be helpful also.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 things I want to talk about. Lead service lines, the sustainability fund, and also the parks in general. So first things first, lead service. If you could go back to that slide, it was 7 million something that you're proposing we budget for next year, 7.785. That funding would come out of the water fund, right?
I believe in some cases it might be coming out of TIF.
Okay.
We were looking in the West Evanston TIF area at some lead service line replacements, but the vast majority is water fund.
Which would not be a GO bond.
No, none of it's GO bond. What we are looking at is IEPA. You could do like a whole meeting on lead service lines, but suffice it to say that there's been a lot of promises of funding for different things as people recognize this is a huge unfunded mandate. There's been less delivery of funding. So while we are optimistic that we might get some funding, we don't know when it will happen or how much entirely.
And this would be federal funding or state funding?
I'll defer to Deputy City Manager.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We're hoping it's federal funding that's routed through the SRF at the local level, at the state level. And I was at the meeting on Friday with the head guy from IEPA that's distributing the money. The feds have said it that only 49% of the money can be grant money. So, and the IEPA is limiting it to $4 million per municipality per year. So if we borrow, if we get $4 million, we're hoping that $2 million or just under $2 million will be loan forgiveness, but then the other $2 million we would have to pay back at a low interest loan rate.
Okay, so we're still putting together numbers for a long-term 30-year projection. What's our time frame for lead service line?
We have to have a plan in by April 15th, 2024. We have to finalize that plan April 15th, 2027, and then we have to start that plan. We currently have approximately 11,500 lead services, but we assume that by 2027 we'll be under 10,000, which then means we have to do in 20 years, we have to do 5% a year.
20 years from 2027.
Starting, you're right, but currently you have to replace any lead service line that's on a water main that's being replaced, as well as you can't repair a lead service line, so you have to replace those as well. And then
So at this point, what we're doing is, for the most part, replacing lead service lines when we're replacing the water main. We're not going out looking separately for lead service lines unless there's a break, point, one at a time, we fix those.
actually we're trying to engage with community members to get them on a wait list. So we're expecting $1 million grant from, I'm going to say it wrong, DCEO, through Senator Simmons, and we understand that will be coming soon. And what we plan to do is replace the homeowner's portion of the lead service line in the low to moderate income census blocks where water mains already been installed. So we won't have to dig out in the street. We're going to go from the home to the parkway, and we're going to get as many lead services replaced that way as we can, plus get rid of the partial lead service lines. We think we can do 200 homes on that, and so far only 120 homes have signed up to get that. And we have made 2 nice videos, one in English, one in Spanish. We have gone to ward meetings. We are now contacting block captains to try to engage them to get the word out. We put big billboard signs out on the streets where we can do this and say, with a QR code, click here and sign up, and people just aren't doing it. Plus, we also feel that we're going to get the $4 million in '23, and we want to be able to start doing that work right away. And so we're asking for people to voluntarily sign up and get on the list, and we're just having a hard time reaching those community members to actually do that. So otherwise, we're going to just decide where we're going to go, but that's not what we want to do.
All right, thanks. I wanted to ask about sustainability, or talk about sustainability really quick. And Laura, you made one of the points that I was hoping you would make, that there's a lot of work that could be considered CARP or could be considered sustainability. It's not all coming out of the sustainability fund.
Not even close.
Right.
It's, I mean, just the fact that sustainability, one of the CARP goals is transportation mobility, so looking at things multimodal and improving multimodal transportation. I mean, that by itself hits the vast majority of the money that we're spending in streets and transportation. And then sewers, all about reducing flooding and keeping the sewer system intact. Like every facilities project we do now that we touch the HVAC system, we're looking at how to make it CARB compliant. So we're really fully on board and working to make sure that all of our projects, as much as possible, incorporate sustainability. And I did not do the same analysis for equity, but we also try to consider equity when possible as well. So this 50/50 sidewalk program would be an example where that is inherently not equitable to expect homeowners to pay 50%. So we just replaced that this year with a regular, fully city-funded program.
Yeah, so we're not trying to do all of our CARP work out of the limited sustainability budget. I would like to, make sure we're kind of elevating some of those CARP concerns from, nice to have bottom of the list priorities to, further up on the list. Yeah, electric vehicle infrastructure, for one, is going to become increasingly critical, in my opinion. And at the same time, we should also be looking for additional revenue sources for the sustainability fund to help us fund some of this work. And so more discussions on that to follow, I suppose. The last point I wanted to make was kind of a general observation about our parks. And if you could go back to the slide where we need how much money ideally per year to maintain our parks?
Around $7 million.
Around $7 million, and we don't have that much money. So I think there's an opportunity here for a nonprofit organization or a public-private partnership. I'm envisioning something like Friends of the Parks. If a community member who might be watching this online would like to take a leadership role in that, I think that would be great. But we have Friends of Robert Crown, we've got Friends of the Ecology Center, and Friends of the Levy Center, Friends of the Library. If equity is important,
I think there is a Parks Foundation, but we have, Audrey Thompson and I were discussing that today. So that might be something to try to activate that foundation again.
Yeah.
I think they've been pretty quiet in recent years. At least for capital improvement, they may be doing other things for the city.
Because I've had some Fourth Ward residents talk to me about raising money for a specific park. That might not be the park that needs the most attention citywide. So if we have some energy in the community to raise money for parks, and we can all go into one fund and we can distribute that equitably across the community, similar to what District 65 is doing with their PEP. What does that stand for? Help me out with that. The PEP project. Anyway, some opportunity for some private fundraising here that might help out the taxpayers.
And I'm hoping we are doing the strategic plan for the park system. And so I'm hopeful that that will help us better identify our needs so that we can come up with like a real replacement plan. What staff has done so far has been pretty high level.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just flag that every winter we raise money for the obnoxiously named Mayor's Holiday Food Book and Toy Drive. And actually the vehicle that accepts those contributions is the Evanston Parks Foundation. So it exists, it's up and running, it's got a bank account, but I agree with Laura, I'm not sure that it's active for this kind of thing at all.
And, I mean, there's an organization there, I'm not sure if that's what they're interested in, because, I mean, the operations alone and all the programs do a tremendous good for the community as well.
That's right. Thank you. No one is requesting to speak for the first time. Councilmember Ravel.
I have just a couple of question, thought kind of things. So you mentioned that we have roughly 60 city buildings.
Yes.
Has staff considered making a list of ones that we might want to divest ourselves of?
That is more of a city manager office situation.
Okay.
So that is definitely, that is a policy decision that can be made and maybe something that is worth considering. One thing that staff has tried to do is for these 6 buildings that I'm not pointing to right now, but I had a slide for these 6 buildings, we have worked for the last 3 years to get to a place, and we're still doing it, but to get where we have costs, of like true costs of what we need to do to stay in these buildings, so that more, less emotional decisions can be made and more objective, fact-based decisions. And so by this time next year, we hope to have that information for noise and police fire headquarters as well.
Okay. I mean, I know, I'm not going to suggest the other idea, which is we have so many parks in Evanston, maybe we should sell some of them. I'm not going there. But buildings sounds pretty unemotional, so it'd be, I guess I'd ask the city manager
An ice rink.
to kind of look into making a list of ones that we might want to sell off, and we wouldn't have to maintain them, and we might even get a little revenue.
I will make a plug for CARP and say that a key goal of CARP is to right-size the
Right.
city's building footprint, because that
Exactly.
reduces our
Exactly, right, yeah.
heating and electric costs as well.
Right, yeah, it's not just fixing them up when they're falling down, but operating them in the meantime. So we do have 2 really big rehab projects, the Civic Center and the Municipal Service Center. Is it possible to do one first and then the second, the other one afterwards, to kind of spread out that big expense?
Yes, sort of.
Sort
I
of.
guess that's the answer. In both cases, the HVAC systems for these 2 buildings are in really bad shape and should have been dealt with like 10 years ago. So, you know, an example is there's a system of distribution piping in the Civic Center that moves heated water around to all the radiators in the different offices. And there's places where those pipes are down to 10 to 20% of their original wall thickness. So there aren't a lot of isolation valves. If one of them goes, we're going to have a problem where we just don't have heat. We've already made a lot of emergency repairs to the boiler and everything else just to keep it operating. The service center is in sort of the same condition. So I think that's something that once we have more detail, because we have kind of this high-level presentation we did on the service center, we need to see the more detailed plan that they're working on now to see if we can spread it out. But I don't think there's any way you can spread it out 20 years.
No,
And so
yeah.
that you're still going to be hit with these huge costs for a few years.
Right, yeah, okay. Well, we'll look for more information. And then I guess my third question was, if I've read all the numbers correctly, the draft 2023 CIP is roughly $15 million more in general obligation bonds than the current year CIP.
Yes.
So what would, if we just wanted to do it all, how much would we have to raise our tax levy to do that?
That would be a finance question.
Good evening again. Yeah, we haven't looked at it, but obviously this is more driven by the discussion at the Finance and Budget Committee. I mean, we haven't issued the bonds. Typically every year by this September, we would have bond in place. But just considering the current economic environment, interest rate environment, and instability there, we are holding off and trying to kind of draw upon our existing fund balance. And we'll keep an eye, along with Lara and I will talk and see at what point we feel like that, okay, we would need to kind of infuse the new capital into the CIP fund. I mean, in terms of the tax burden, obviously, if you see the property tax, I mean, city share is 20%. So, I mean, sometimes, yeah, even if we look at it, like our total levy is around $55 million, including everything, police pension, fire pension, and all that, you know, and still it's a 20% of the share. So, I mean, I can count it and work with Lara and see if the city council decides to go in that direction and say, yep, we want to do X number of, you know, 20, 30, $40 million. And we can come up with the various scenarios that, okay, how much each household with 100,000, 200, we did it with the Robert, at the time of Robert Crown, that what would be the impact on each individual.
Okay. So I think that kind of information will be helpful so we know just how much we can afford.
Absolutely, yes.
We'll issue a budget memo with that information.
Just briefly, Councilmember Val, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, Luke Stowe, City Manager. A few months ago, we did put in for the Bloomberg Foundation Putting Assets to Work Incubator. We were not selected for the first cohort. We're hoping to be selected for a future cohort, but it does exactly what you were talking about as far as analyzing all of our buildings, parking structures. Should we reinvest in them? Should we change the programming? Should we sell them? Whatever the case may be, making sure that we're utilizing the assets as best as we can. So hopefully we'll be in a future cohort on that.
So now no one is requesting to speak for the first time, so we go to Councilmember Reed for a second opportunity with 2.5 minutes left.
Thank you. I just want to note, Councilmember Revelle, there was a list that was produced within certainly the last term, the last few years, of all of the city assets. I know that our former mayor requested that, and so I know that's floating around somewhere, and I've seen it previously. I don't know if Councilmember Wynn, if you remember that list, or okay. So I want to mention a few things. So one. We talked about sewer repairs, and I know that I believe next year the south end of town, particularly the 8th Ward and 9th Ward, if I'm not mistaken, are budgeted to receive some fairly significant investment in sewer repair.
I'm not particularly aware of that. Most of our, I don't have it up, but most of our sewer funding actually is through just making sewer repairs on the streets we're resurfacing and doing cured-in-place pipelining. So occasionally we do a large diameter cured-in-place pipelining where the sewer is collected, huge section of the city, and those are all like 110, 150 years old. But I don't think we have a big sewer project going in. Dave, are you aware? No.
Are we doing a stormwater retention plan, looking at the impact and how that ties into climate change and, you know, how we deal with the stormwater with all the bigger storms?
Yes, currently the city is wrapping up its stormwater management plan. That will not identify any specific projects to be completed. Instead, we'll have to come back to the city council and that will indicate that if the city wants to provide for a 15-year level service, it will cost you roughly X millions of dollars. If you want to provide for a 20-year level of protection, it will cost you this many millions of dollars. And based on that, then we would start hiring other consultants to dig into the more specific projects that we could do. But there's nothing currently on the drawing board. And then the other thing staff would be recommending, once city council determines what that level of service will be and the cost to get that, staff would be proposing that the city develop a stormwater utility fee which would raise revenues based on the amount of impervious surface that each property has. And that would be the new way of generating that income. But until you have a dollar figure that you're shooting for, it's kind of, you can't put the horse or the cart in front of the horse.
Thank you. So that was my question about the sewer repair and stormwater management. We have a combined sewer, or
We have 3 systems. The old combined sewer, which is portions that are 130 years old probably. Then we have a relief overflow system, which was what was built through the 90s and 2000s, so that the combined system could overflow into that and not cause basement backups. And that's also why when we started using ponding on the streets and putting restrictors in the catch basins to limit how fast water could go in to the combined sewer system. And then we also have we have storm sewer along the canal areas.
okay. My reason for bringing this up is the south end of town, 8th Ward, has been experiencing, especially with the rain in the last few weeks, a few recent storms, really bad flooding in folks' homes. I'm receiving emails after every rainstorm with tons and tons of neighbors saying, hey, my house is flooded. It feels like a river is letting out into my basement. That was an email I got a day or two ago. And so I just want to make sure that, that we're making investments here, particularly in the south end, the part of town that I represent, to ensure that, less and less we're having these events where folks' basements are flooding because of a stormwater runoff. And so I'd love to, I guess, separately have some kind of a sit down and begin to strategize there. And I am in full support of the impervious surface tax. I think I put in a referral about that a while ago and support that. So to close out, I have one question about transportation, or about our transportation infrastructure. And I made a referral a while ago to create a transportation revenue lockbox. And maybe Council Cummings can opine on this a bit, but there's a recent Supreme Court decision that would mandate that all of our transportation-related revenue, whether it be from tickets stemming from transportation-related tickets to the wheel tax, to a whole other host of fees and fines and taxes, those funds must be spent on transportation. I know my time must be coming to an end.
It's already gone and done that.
All right. Well, I have Councilor Cummings, and then I'll close out.
Good evening, members of City Council, Clerk Mendoza, City Manager Luke Stowe, Nick Cummings, Corporation Counsel. To Councilmember Reed's point, there was an Illinois Supreme Court decision. Illinois Road and Transportation Builders Association sued the County of Cook, alleging that the County of Cook was unconstitutionally diverting funds to run county operations. There was an Illinois constitutional amendment, I believe it was Article 9, Section 11, that was added to the state revenue article that basically limited what anybody in the state could use money derived from transportation funds. And in reading this case while I was sitting over here on the sidelines, the parking revenue from the county was included in one of those funds. So that is a transportation tax, something that I didn't know the answer to until about 3 minutes ago, that parking revenue would be a transportation tax. And so money that is generated from our parking revenues should be limited to being spent on transportation items, infrastructure in the city of Evanston.
Thank you, and I'm just going to close out here with 30 seconds. And so, what the point of that referral, which hasn't been referred yet, what I'd like to see, and what I think is mandated by state law, is that we get a full accounting of all of our transportation-related revenue, whether it's coming from tickets or other places outside of the traditional places would be looking for CIP. Get an accounting of what all of those funds are, and make sure that we're spending that on transportation-related infrastructure, and I think that'll help us better. That'll help us better.
Thank you very much.
Better account for our transportation infrastructure.
Thank you. Seeing that no one else is requesting to speak, that concludes our discussion on the capital improvement program, which I think we all learned a lot from, and also revealed that we have lots more to talk about. So thank you to everyone for your engagement on this important issue. This brings us to item SP2. Would someone care to make a motion on item SP2?
I move item SP2, retention thank you bonus for all city employees.
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves passage of the retention thank you bonus for all city employees. Councilmember Newsome seconds. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Reed.
I'll just say I really appreciate Manager Stowe bringing this forward. I think our city employees deserve it. I will say I have received some outreach from city employees who are thankful for this, but also would love to see an acknowledgement of those who are on the front lines during the pandemic, and I'd love us to make sure that we're looking into that as well for those staff who were here during the pandemic and who maybe were expecting a bit more. So thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Newsome.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton. Aye.
Clerk Mendoza, I'm actually here. This is Councilmember Burns, and I'm aye.
Okay. Councilmember Burns is an aye. Councilmember Sufferton, aye as well. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Heracles.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
With 9 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion passes, and the retention bonuses are approved. This brings us to item SP3. Would someone care to make a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I move item SP3, retention bonus for non-union full-time EPD staff.
Second.
Councilmember Newsome moves passage of the retention bonus of non-union full-time EPD staff. Councilmember Nguyen seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Newsome.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton. That's an aye. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Heracles.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
With 9 voting in favor and none voting against, the retention bonuses are approved. This brings us to item SP4. Would someone care to make a motion on item SP4?
I'll move item SP4, wage increase for all exempt employees.
Second.
Councilmember Reed moves passage of the wage increase for all exempt employees. I believe Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Newsome.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton. That's an aye. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Heracles.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen.
With 9 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion passes and the increases for exempt employees are approved. And this brings us finally to item SP5. Would someone care to make a motion on item SP5?
I'll move SP5, approval of a one-time payment to the Evanston firefighters, IAFF employees.
Second.
Councilmember Kelly moves approval of a one-time payment to the Evanston firefighters, IAFF employees. Councilmember Newsome seconds. Is there any discussion? Yeah. Councilmember Sufferton.
Yeah, Council Cummings, can you please explain the collective bargaining implications of this?
Good evening again, Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. Just wanted to clarify for the council, there was a side letter that was associated with the current contract that's in place that expires at the end of the year, that were the union went without increases in years 2021 and 2022. They were deferred until the end of this year. Part of that increase was given in March of 2022 already under interim manager Gandersky. And so the remaining of that is what is being advanced here. And so at the end of the year, that last 2.5 or 2.25 would not be given to the union. So I just want to make sure everybody was clear on that. Even though it will also cover some back pay for that time period, but it will not that will not be advanced again at the end of the year as according to the current contract. I just want everybody to be clear on that. You look puzzled, Councilmember Ravel.
I mean, so
So the union agreed to defer about 5%
Right.
of increases over the last 2 years after 2020. Half of that was already given to them. It was supposed to be deferred until the end of this year. Half of that was given to the union in March of this year. This is the other half.
Right.
And I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that at the end of the year, like this is taking care of all of what was deferred under the current contract.
Right. And in terms of the pay level, at that point, it will be what it had been negotiated, or there'll be a whole new negotiation going forward?
For 2023 and beyond, there will be a whole new negotiation.
Yeah.
But the pay levels will be increased according to the
Right.
percentage that you guys vote on tonight.
Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on to that. I'd first like to express appreciation to our firefighters who, worked through the throes of COVID, and many had to stay in hotels, couldn't go home to their families, and also gratitude to them for agreeing to relinquish, to forfeit previously negotiated raises for those 2 years, 21 and 22, in lieu of layoffs, in lieu of, losing firefighters. That not only helped to, cement the team and the culture in the fire department, but it was also for our Evanston residents to maintain the high standard of service that we get from our Evanston Fire Department. I don't know if folks know, our fire department is rated as high as it can, IHO, I think it's ISO 1, right? Very high ratings. So I'm very grateful to the firefighters for agreeing to forfeit those raises instead of losing firefighters. So just to be clear, this was, again, previously negotiated, signed off raises for 21 and 22 that were given up during COVID with the idea that the city was facing a shortfall of revenue. And so I'm very grateful to the firefighters for making that decision. So all this does is replace the money that they would have received had they not forfeited those raises during those 2 years. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn.
With 9 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion passes and the one-time payment to the Evanston firefighters is approved. This brings us to call of the wards. Councilmember Newsma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a reminder, there is a neighborhood meeting this week, Wednesday, 6 p.m. at the Unitarian Church. The topic is Margarita Inn, and talking about moving forward with the Good Neighbor Agreement.
Councilmember Burns.
No report.
Councilmember Sufferton. Councilmember Ravel.
No report.
Councilmember Reed.
I just want to note that the last Thursday of this month, the 8th Ward will have our ward meeting. We're seeking to have another hybrid meeting at the Levy Senior Center, and virtually residents can join in. The link will be posted online. And also, I actually want to thank, yesterday the 8th Ward, we might have had the last block party of the season, I think this was Saturday, not yesterday. And folks in the community, the Parks and Rec staff have rolled out a new format for mini block parties, particularly in areas such as the 8th Ward that have a higher risk for economic challenges, violence, the whole host of things. And the Parks and Rec staff provide staff for the block party. They partner with Kurt's Cafe to provide food for the block party. And I haven't been to block parties around the city, but I would have to say that this has to be been one of the most diverse block parties in our city, one of the most fun block parties in our city. The 8th Ward knows how to throw a block party. And I just want to thank the Parks and Rec staff, and particularly Director Thompson, particularly the staff, but including Director Thompson, for one, putting together this programming with the I am forgetting the name of the funds or the initiative, but the really great initiative, as well as the folks at Kurt's Cafe for being a part of this. So thank you to the staff, thank you to Director Thompson, and thank you to the community for coming out and making the block party what it was.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Couple announcements. The joint 3rd and 9th Ward meeting about the development at Lot 1 is canceled. We will be announcing our makeup rain date soon. 9th Ward meeting this Wednesday virtually will be at 7:30. And then just a reminder that it's Latinx Heritage Month. We have a celebration put on by the city at Elks Park from 4 to 9 on Saturday. And that's in the 8th Ward at Callan and Mulford. A lot of great things going on. So it's Encanto movie, food, games, art. There's a traditional clothing contest and a chance to win gift cards. So I hope to see people there.
Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. Tomorrow evening, I have our First Ward conversations on the patio of the Graduate Hotel. So I hope folks will join us there. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Good evening. I will be working with with the communications department to start getting the newsletter rolling, so be looking for that. Also be looking for monthly ward meetings, and there'll be a rotating location, but they'll be planned and advertised well in advance starting in October. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Nguyen. Just want to remind everyone that the Rules Committee was supposed to begin 25 minutes ago, so upon adjournment, the Rules Committee will begin essentially immediately. With that, seeing nothing further to come before us, the September 19th special meeting of the Evanston City Council stands adjourned.